All right, well, I am in Sydney today. We actually haven't recorded a podcast in Sydney in a few months, actually. So before we get into it, I just want to do a quick shout out to Michael Larson. He's been doing a great job recording podcasts in Queensland. He's been doing some stuff in America, and he's heading over to the ARA show next year for the ARA again. He's doing a great job, and I hope you guys have been enjoying listening to some of the episodes he's been recording. But today we have Tony Symons. So Tony and I have been talking well, we've known each other for a long time, but we mentioned coming on the podcast probably a couple of years ago.
Yeah, a few years ago.
Yeah?
Yep.
And then I found out that you live down the road from our office in Crow's Nest. So that even was like even more of a reason to get you on. And then eventually stars aligned, and here we are today. So Tony, thank you for coming on the podcast.
No, great to be here, and great to see what you've built with this rental journal. And I agree, I have been listening to Michael as well, and he's doing a great job.
Very good. So maybe just want to, for the listeners, before we get into your role within Kennards Hire, like how did you first come into the industry, and where did you originate?
Probably like most people, I stumbled across it by accident. I was in a previous role, previous industry, nothing to do with hire, and to be honest, I was looking for a new job and took the first one that came across me. So that was with the company called Kennards Machinery, and Kennards Hire was another part of their business that they had, which was in Perth in Western Australia.
Okay, and so I didn't even know they used to hire equipment. So they do they still have that division, or is that moved on?
No, they don't do hire anymore. No, they've been around in business for 65 years as Kennards Machinery and Kennards Hire. Built a lot of regional branches in Western Australia initially that was on-sold to Wreck Air Hire in those days, and then restarted again in hire in the 90s. Working for Kennards, I bought some of those branches along the way, which we might get to later on. But no, they're not in hire anymore, but they still import and manufacture and sell machinery across Australia.
Because they're like really a cornerstone for equipment, like for quality. They're known as like a brand that is trusted.
Absolutely, yeah, very much so. And representation, like I say, across Australia, and supply still a lot of equipment into the hire industry.
Okay, and so then so what was your first job then? Like what was your job title?
Well, the actual job title was a parts interpreter. So I had to read parts manuals and understand spare parts and supply spare parts to hire companies around Australia again, and to resellers. So small engine dealers, lawnmower shops and things the like spread across the country. And I think at that stage they had 6 or 7 hire branches, and one of the branches was at the main warehouse, and I used to work in there on weekends for a bit of extra money. So started very early on working in the hire branch. And Terry Cromlin, who's since passed, but was the founder of that business, he was very much having his people that worked for him work also in the hire business. So you'd have hire as customers, so he really wanted people to have an understanding of the industry whilst you were working in other parts of his business.
But you had no prior experience, nothing to do with parts?
No, nothing to do with parts, no. Nothing to do with hire or really even machinery. I did grow up on a small property in Tasmania where we used some very basic small machinery, but no, I didn't have experience in the industry, no.
Wow, okay. And so then how did that eventually lead you to Kennards Hire? Was there steps in between?
Yeah, a lot of steps and a lot of opportunity. I was very fortunate working for Terry Cromlin and his son Richard Cromlin as well. So they, after my time in spare parts, there was an opportunity for me to, initially I did some purchasing work with them as well, and was involved with the importing of machinery they were bringing a lot of Robin engines in from Japan and other products from Japan and from the US. So I was doing some work in their purchasing department, getting more and more exposure to their business. And then an opportunity came up in Queensland, which I leapt at. So I relocated initially to Queensland and was travelling throughout Queensland in a sales rep role, selling those products into hire and into small dealerships around Queensland.
Was that like a big step, moving into sales?
Yeah, it was, very much so, and into sales and moving interstate. I was, at that stage, the only person working from them in Queensland, so it was very much a work-from-home role. This is in the mid-90s, and I had to travel the whole state, and driving. It was pretty low-cost operation at that stage. I had a station wagon with some engines and things in the back of the car, and I'd travel the whole state. So I'd get up very early Saturday morning, leave Brisbane, drive 1,000 kilometres or 800 miles for our American friends thereabouts on a Saturday, and then do a similar distance on the Sunday, get up to Cairns, spend the next week driving, visiting lots and lots of little hire companies and big ones around Queensland, and then drive home again on the following Saturday. So there's a lot of time on the road and a lot of time in regional and remote locations with not a lot of phone coverage in those days.
That's a big call, yeah, to move from WA to Queensland. Like, was that something that, like, you were already interested in doing, or was like, how did that eventuate?
Yeah, I guess I have moved a couple of times previously interstate prior to that opportunity, but it was really a chance for me to take a leap of faith. I've always enjoyed travel, and so it was an opportunity to get out and try something. And there was a pre-existing role I took over from a guy by the name of Graham Paul in those days, but he moved on into his family's business, and the opportunity was created. And fortunately and thankfully that Richard and Terry backed me in and gave me a great opportunity.
And so that sounds like really set the foundation for your knowledge within hire, because you're working in the hire business over in WA, but then selling to hire businesses is different again. So
absolutely,
your knowledge, understanding of like what do they actually need for in terms of equipment and servicing and stuff like that, but then how do you serve the end customer as well?
For sure, and it was, and I had some great leaders and help along the way, and both from within the business, but also from the customers, and some of them, I've got great relationships with, and they've built very successful businesses and moved elsewhere. But I do have a very strong recollection. I went out to Mount Isa once trip, and that was actually one of the first times I flew. So it's a long way west of Townsville, and I went out there and had a great day and called in on a couple of hire companies, and one person in particular said, "That's great. It's great that you've seen someone come out to Mount Isa, but I'm not going to order anything from you today. You're going to have to come back a second time, and then we'll start to build a relationship, and I'll purchase some things from you." And that was something that stuck with me now, 30 odd years later. And it was really just, you can't just turn up on someone's door and expect to get a sale of any type until they know that there's a bit of follow up and a bit of consistency. So not very many people went out to Mount Isa. So he was very generous to give me that information, and certainly bought quite a bit of product over the years from me.
Yeah, so it's going to be hard for those people that hide behind Zoom meetings. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, things have changed a little bit, but you certainly need to, in a lot of cases, you need to be a repeat caller.
And it's also like when you're in person, you've got the meeting, but then it's the conversations that happen before and after the meeting. You sort of meet other people within the business. You've got that relationship. When you see each other in person, you're like, it's so-and-so from wherever. When it's like in a Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever it is, it's almost like the meeting starts, you do it, and it just ends, and it's very structured.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
When you're in person, you can build that rapport a lot easier. Like I definitely prefer in-person meetings, but as you said, the times are sort of changing and whatnot. So
yeah, no, I agree. And in those days as well, I spending a lot of time with small businesses, and you'd get to know them and even their families, and travelling through country areas and things. You'd stay in town, so you'd catch up for dinner or something after work, and really build that strong relationship. And that was really beneficial for me as my career's gone on to get their learning and understanding and motivators in their business as to when they'd replace equipment, what they'd buy, what sort of criteria they're looking for as to when they invest in their business.
And so then how did Kennards Hire happen then? Like what was the step?
Yeah, so obviously at that stage I was selling equipment to Kennards in Queensland, and Tom Kinross, one of the industry legends, was a great customer of mine. He was the general manager for Kennards in Queensland. So got a good relationship with Tom, and then I'd actually moved from Queensland to New South Wales. After 3.5 years, I moved to Sydney, still with Cromwell's, and was initially looking to get back to Perth, but they said, could I go down to Sydney and do some work there for a little while. So got even closer to some of the Kennards people in my time in Sydney with Cromwell's. And then for family reasons, I did go back to Perth in about 2000. Cromwell's created a position really that didn't exist, and that was around the same time as Kennards was starting in Western Australia, and so I was involved with selling quite a bit of equipment to Kennards for that initial startup. And really, like as I said, Cromwell's had created a role that didn't really exist, and there wasn't much scope for me in a fairly small business at that stage. So I left and had a couple of offers for different roles, but Kennards was one of them, and Matt Hardy at the time had moved across from Sydney to set up Kennards in Western Australia, and Matt employed me there.
So what was the business like then? Like when Kennards Hire today is seen as this national player that's like dominant, quality of service. You walk in, the branch is like squeaky clean. Customer service is always like top tier when you talk to someone like they're sort of your mate and stuff like that. Like going back all those years, what was it like then?
Well, certainly the Western Australian business was very small. The initial acquisition was 3 small branches of the one company. Very, very small business, a lot of small tools, just 2 or 3 people working in each of the branches. there was no brand awareness of the Kennards name, and Western Australia was very parochial and insulated in those days. So there was a bit of negativity in the market about this big player coming over from Sydney and trying to take on the world. So that was interesting times. Certainly it was very much a small business, like I say, and small tools primarily, although I was initially employed as a sales rep or a business development manager to try and grow the business, but it was much smaller than it is today, that's for sure.
And so the listeners are probably like, yeah, but what's his job title now? So what is your role right now?
Now I'm General Manager of Commercial, which has me looking after one of our smaller business, our major projects business, and also setting a lot of strategy and guidance and direction for the sales team across Australia and New Zealand.
When you go back all those years, like, is that something that you ever even thought was possible, or was it like, did you realise that you were going to be in hire for that long? Like, how did that sort of like
no, you wouldn't ever dream that you'd spend 30 odd years plus in an industry like this that I wasn't even aware of existed, and the opportunities that I've had within the industry to travel, to live in different parts of Australia and travel a lot in Australia and internationally through the career. So no, there's no way I would have ever imagined.
And so, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were looking after Western Australia and Northern Territory for Kennards at one point. I actually remember when I was at Base Plan, I spoke to Stu Dean and I said, hey, I want to head over and just like visit as many Kennards Hire branches as possible. And he was like, sure, do whatever you want. And so I went over there, and then I didn't know, like, I'd never met you before, and I purposely was like, I need to meet the state manager over there. And so I went out of my way just to shake your hand and say, hey, I'm Mark from Base Plan and whatnot. And ever since then, like, we've sort of been somewhat close. Like, every time we see each other, we've got that friend. So it goes back to that original building trust. And I think that goes a long way.
Absolutely.
In that. And then on that same trip, I think I visited 8 Kennards Hire branches. I just went pretty much down the coast and just went as many as possible.
Yep.
Just because I was just interested in learning. And so I think going back to your original point, just building up that, like, I had no motive. There was no motive at all. It was like, I'm not selling anything. I'm not doing anything. I just want to say hello, basically. So that's how we originally got connected.
Yeah, that's right. I do recall that, absolutely. And bounced it, come across each other at ARA shows and hire shows here in Australia and at other times. So, yeah, do recall those days for sure.
So obviously we're in Sydney again. So you've obviously done a few back and forward. So how did you end up like from WA back in Sydney again? Yeah,
I guess over probably 15 years or more, nearly 20 years in WA, based in WA, and Matt moved interstate again when there were 4 branches in Perth, and I took over the GM role. That was about 2004. So over that time, I was heavily involved in a lot of acquisitions that we did, new branch openings, initially in Perth itself, but then I finally convinced the Kennards family and board that we should relocate, but open some branches in the northwest of Western Australia and in the areas called the Pilbara and the Goldfields, which is east of Perth. So we successfully grew those branches, and then we also did an acquisition in Darwin. So I was then looking after the Northern Territory. So built the Western Australian Northern Territory business up to 26 branches. And then an opportunity came for me to relocate to Sydney for a national role. I thought I'd achieved quite a bit and was looking for the next challenge, I guess. And so relocated to Sydney just before the start of COVID.
Wow. Okay. And so moving to Sydney, what was your new role?
At that stage, I was head of specialist businesses, product. There was a lot of work starting to be done on innovative products and those sorts of things. So I was going to do a lot of travel and sourcing products and in the innovation space. But COVID came along and put paid to those plans. So then not too long after that, I moved into this role as General Manager Commercial.
Gotcha, understand. And so just touching on when you said Kennards Hire first expanded to WA, it was like a lot of smaller tools and whatnot. How has the Kennards Hire, I guess, product changed in those 20 years as well? Because I guess a lot of people that aren't involved in the hire industry probably think of Kennards Hire as like, oh, you just go there and rent a chainsaw or whatever you're doing. But obviously I know today that they serve major projects and you can basically rent anything up to a certain size of equipment. So what did you see in terms of like that change over those years, and when those changed, like were they for certain reasons, or was it to grow into certain markets, or what do you think it was?
Yeah, a couple of things at play, Mark. I think certainly in the Western Australian experience and Northern Territory also, but there was a lot of equipment that was evolving itself. So a lot of people will be familiar with bigger air compressors, bigger generators, big clunky diesel, loud engines that took a lot to transport as well. And so one of the things we did in Perth at that time was started what we call the Kennards pump and power business. We started putting 20 kVA generators on trailers. The product had become smaller and lighter and quieter. It was much easier to move, but still it meant that we created that as a specialist business within the company. We started that in Perth. We had a couple of other specialist businesses start in other parts and other states, but that was the one we did in Perth. So that was one part of the evolution. And then really the one of the big changes was moving to the branches in the Pilbara that were more mining community focused without being mining machinery, but a lot of construction in those areas. And so that was a big change in the customer base and expanding the product further. So that was another key, and then really just growing the whole business. So the capital city branches people are familiar with and think that that's what the business is. That's probably only half the Kennards business now, and a lot of it's the regional, the remote, the bigger, more specialised product.
I get an email every other week about Kennards buying someone in a regional town. So obviously it's something that you guys are strategically doing to move into those smaller towns and whatnot as well. And obviously serve what I was saying before about being able to weekend warrior that wants to rent, I don't know, some mobile scaffolding or whatever it might be, or dealing with a tier one contractor that needs larger equipment that's specialist, basically.
Yeah, that's right. And trying to get as close to where our customers are as we can within reason. But certainly there's a lot of opportunities in regional Australia. There's a lot of work out there as well. So doing more acquisitions is a key part of the business as well.
Yeah. And obviously in that time as well, Kennards Hire expanded into New Zealand.
Correct.
And so that was
that's
like
right.
I remember when that was happening, it was like there was a lot of like different opinions around whether it was a risk that they wanted to take, but obviously moving forward now, I think there's 28 branches or something like that over there.
I think so. Again, it keeps increasing all the time. As
crazy.
The whole company's now up to 215, I think it is.
Wow.
215, 216. So it's moved pretty quickly, over that period of time.
That's unbelievable. So touching on product, and I'm not sure whether this is going to be a positive or negative answer, but I remember there was a big push. I think it was Blue Diamond Machinery were going down the hydrogen generator path. There was a lot of marketing that Kennards Hire was doing around getting those types of machinery in there for sustainability and whatnot. And I can definitely see that that's like a direction that the industry is going. But I was interested to get your perspective on how far away are we from it actually being a possibility to be used in more of a general sense? Because from my perspective, it seemed like it was very niche to certain projects and certain customers to hit a certain target and stuff like that. What was the experience so far with those hydrogen generators? And what were the name of them again? Do you remember the name of those?
No, I don't.
It was
a hydrogen generator.
Yeah, I think it was like it was a toy.
There's a couple of brands,
brand.
a couple of brands involved, and the name and structure has changed slightly on the way. I might just step back slightly. So the entire construction industry have got high appetite for burning less diesel effectively, and so anything that comes to market that does that, construction companies are interested in. So there's been a lot of move already and significant move and development in hybrid units, so small diesel engine but solar power as well, and batteries. So they're becoming very, very popular in the industry. Then there's the pure solar products, and then there's also the hydrogen. So the hydrogen was a big shift completely and got a lot of attention initially, and still has. There's genuine interest in the product and what it can offer. There's challenges at this stage still getting hydrogen to construction sites and moving it around, and still there's some cost issues. But how close are we? I'm not sure. I think it'll evolve and become one of the options that are available to people. I don't think it's going to replace every diesel engine, but it'll be one of the solutions. But certainly the hybrid and the battery and a lot of movement in that area as people talk more and more about ESG and those sorts of issues.
Yeah, look, it's definitely like I remember when I was over at the ARA show 2 years ago. I can't remember which OEM it was, but they were releasing a hydrogen-powered excavator. I was just like, it's sort of like, oh, caught me off guard a little bit with that, and so it's obviously happening. But I feel like people have to take risks to get to the next step, and so I think there's a lot of people that are pushing like, no, this is a waste of time and whatnot. But like, if people like Kennards Hire and other big companies and other tier one contractors don't take those risks and figure out like, is it the cost, is it supply, whatever it might be, then the industry won't evolve. So I think someone like Kennards Hire taking that risk and doing that is a good thing for the industry overall. And it might be 10 years, might be 15 years, whatever it is. But then, because people like yourself and other big companies that have done it, it sort of helps the industry as a whole.
I agree totally, and I see almost a responsibility on the industry to support the OEMs and their investment. So we can't ask OEMs to invest and develop all of this equipment if we're not going to help work with them as part of the trial and part of the evolution.
Yeah, definitely. So there's probably a few people, there's some terms we were saying before around major projects and the commercial side of the business. So what does that actually mean for Kennards Hire today? And like, how does that engagement with customers, because it's probably very different to someone walking in wanting to hire something. What does that mean to Kennards, and how do you sort of engage with those businesses?
Yeah, I guess it is a bit different and a bit niche. Everyone could describe a major project completely different. We have got some criteria as to what it means for us. But I guess the business has grown to such a size and such a diversity now that a lot of customers could have extensive number of touch points through our system, through our business, whether it be all the branches, internal sales, external sales. There's a lot of potential touch points. What we've done in building the major project business is turn that on its head somewhat and created a single point of contact for a lot of these sites. And that will involve our people spending a lot of time on the projects themselves and becoming that trusted, reliable partner in a genuine sense, because they're there on the site. They understand how it works. They understand the scope of works, where the gates are, any specific equipment requirements, etc., etc. So it's been a great growing part of our business.
And then does that mean you have to hire different types of salespeople then, or are you trying to mentor them to do it? Because it's a different type of role.
It is a different role, and they're very much operational people that are building strong relationships to satisfy people's needs on sites. So we don't even refer to them as salespeople, but they are doing a lot of selling, and so that's part of the evolution of what's happened. So in terms of what type of people, where do we get them from? A lot of them are internal people from our business, so they've got very good understanding of the equipment. Some are external people we've employed who are more trades-based people, so they've got knowledge of working on projects. And some have come from a sales background, so a diversity of people.
And so when we talk about major projects, obviously not everyone can supply to a major project. Obviously Kennards Hire has that reputable brand and whatnot. But what is the difference between getting equipment on a tier one project, on a major project, whether it be a rail project or an infrastructure or whatever it might be, compared to just supplying equipment to a roofer that wants to get a scissor lift?
Sure. At times there's a lot of compliance of the equipment itself. They may have different standards. They require extra flashing lights or painted with high-vis tape on it and those sorts of things. So there can be, for some, different equipment requirements. Some have third-party websites that they want the equipment registered on before it goes to site. There's a lot of issues around documentation, service history, those sorts of things. And then the people themselves often have got to be inducted to be able to go onto the site. So it's a range of equipment. It's the depth. They need to know that you're going to be able to support them, because, as we know in this industry, a lot of what we do is reactionary. So they don't need to hire anything until they need it, and they need to know that it's going to get there in a hurry and be reliable when it gets there.
Does that slow the process down significantly, do you think? Like, yeah, you want to react to it, but it's not like, all right, we're sending the machine out now, or is there like a rigid step to go, all right, go to the portal, upload the documentation, do these checks, make sure we've got one that has the flashing lights or whatever it might be? Like, How does that change that engagement process?
Yeah, it means there's more touch points in our system, for sure. You don't want it to delay things, obviously, because if they need it there in a hurry. So having the size of business, I guess, and the support systems internally to say, well, one person can be driving the truck while somebody else is doing the online work back in the office, so to speak.
Yeah. It's definitely something where there's a lot of opportunities to grow, but I think a lot of businesses struggle to be able to supply all the equipment that someone needs, or the compliance or whatnot. So I think it's interesting watching all the larger hire companies move into that and then have to adhere to all the rules of engagement, basically, which makes the portal side is an interesting thing. It's like how can there be better technology solutions out to make it easier for them to connect? I saw a machine once for a rail project that had 5 different QR codes on it.
Right. Yeah.
One for each major project that was different contractor. And I saw the machine. I was like, "What's this?" Oh yeah, they all want their QR codes on all our machines, and so we just put them on everything just to make it easier for them.
That's right.
But it's just like, wow, just like all those steps, you're just doing whatever it is to get the machine on site to fulfill the.
Yeah, that's what you've got to do. I mean, we still have some that still want the hard copy printout of the operator's manual, and so there'd be a 100-page hard copy manual attached to a piece of equipment because that's what the client wants.
Yeah, but you're like, that's a QR code on the machine.
Right.
Please just get it.
Yeah.
No, we refuse.
No, that's right.
They're like, oh, what if someone scrapes your QR code off and we need it and all that sort of stuff? But it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And the whole ESG, the environmental social governance space, is evolving significantly. Within Kennards, we're calling ours Geared for the Future. So there's a whole ESG strategy, and a lot of construction clients are very much looking for what's happening in that space.
I heard something, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard it along the grapevine, that Kennards Hire was moving more into shoring. Is that a thing?
Shoring is a thing, absolutely. Yeah. So we have expanded into a little bit of that product, not to be a major player in that market necessarily, but it's a complementary product to a lot of what we do. Yeah,
that's a great example. Yeah, where you haven't really done much of it, but then it opens up doors for other things.
Correct. Yeah,
but shoring is it's quite complicated. Getting the equipment on there, like damage, all that sort of stuff. And so when Kennards Hire decides, all right, well now we want to do this, do you sort of go out and find specialists that understand shoring, or are you sort of recruiting people and exposing them or whatnot? Because it just seems like another very complicated thing.
Yeah, it could be and it can be. In shoring in particular, we see it as a complementary product actually to a lot of our pumping business. So it's an add-on, it's a build, it's in that market area. So it's probably again a little bit different to others, but it's an evolving part of our offer of product and services that complement each other. So in that we partner with manufacturers and OEMs, distributors to help us get the product knowledge on whatever product that we're doing. Sometimes we can bring expertise in from outside. Sometimes it'll come through acquisition. So it evolves constantly. Yeah,
I guess if you're not doing like the engineering side of it, it probably makes it a little bit simpler. But was it Mark Snook and Dean or those guys? Like they're obviously the pump experts.
Correct, yeah.
And there's a lot of engineering that goes along with that. But then, it's interesting just seeing how the business evolves and the different types of products they get into. And really, Kennards Hire is more than just like a general hire business. Now it's a specialist in lots of different things, which I think a lot of people listening to this podcast might not actually know that.
No, that's right, very much. And we do have more technical people involved with doing installation work for pumps, for power, for traffic management systems. The major projects part of the business. So there's a lot going on now in terms of how we take the business and continue to grow and evolve it and service more customers.
Yeah. So you name dropped a few people earlier, but I just want to come back to that. So who do you think are some people that have really helped you, maybe from a mentor side, over your career so far?
Certainly a lot. Obviously, back to the Cromlin's game again. Terry Cromlin and Richard Cromlin and a couple of senior people in that business. Kevin Kitchen, who's still there after all this time.
What a name, Kevin Kitchen.
Kevin Kitchen has been a regular attendee at the hire shows over the years, as Cromlins have exhibited most years. So Kevin had a key role in my career as well, and the late great Frank Collegia, who some of the older members who are listening may recall. So that was in the Cromlins days. When I came to Kennards, obviously Andy Kennard and the Kennard family, Peter Lankin, very much so, and Bill Whitehouse, our outgoing CEO. Bill, I'd reported directly to Bill for many, many years in my career, and wouldn't be where I am without his help and support and guidance. And the business may never have got to the Pilbara and the Northern Territory and some of those areas but for Bill. So they'd be the key ones along the way, as well as a lot of customers in my early days in Queensland were great support, and elsewhere since then. So and the other, there's Kennards is very much like we say it's a family business and we operate like a family, but very much that's true. And the general manager group are very close, and a lot of them have been there for a long, long time. So a lot of people.
Yeah, very nice. And so you mentioned the Hire Association and the trade show. So what involvement have you had? I think you're the vice president nationally at the moment, but maybe go back to when was your first show, and then what has been your involvement over the years?
Yeah, a lot. It's been a hell of a journey, and I probably should have mentioned Phil Newby as well as a mentor of mine from the early days of the association. So I think I went to my first hire show in the Burswood Casino in Perth in I think it was 1993 or thereabouts. It was a very early hire show I attended. And then when I was in Queensland in the mid to late 90s, there were things called the North Queensland Roundup, which is over a long weekend, and it was basically a small trade show and meeting on a golf course somewhere in North Queensland. So I was very heavily involved then as an exhibitor. Attended a lot of meetings in Queensland when I was there. And then when I went back to Perth in 2000, there wasn't really a state committee. And so I got together a couple of the people over there and said, what if we have a trade show? And Cromlin's actually hosted it in the back of their warehouse and car park. So we had a trade show then and formed a small committee and kept things going there. So I was the WA president, I think, for 8 or 10 years, and have been the national vice president, you say, for 2 or 3 years. So
wow.
Very strong involvement. And it's been brilliant for me. I've made a lot of friends through that time, a lot of business networks and colleagues, and build relationships with people that I was in Perth. I was then able to go on behalf of Kennards and buy their business when they were ready to exit. But just building those really strong connections with people.
That was going to be my follow-up question. So if there's a small business out there that's like, why do I have to be a member of the Hire Association? Why do I have to go to this trade show? Like, what would you say to those small businesses?
Yeah, I think it's probably a valid question for some, but I think the industry is so welcoming and so inviting that you would certainly get a lot of information from attending those events and building relationships. There's some financial advantages being part of a combined purchasing group, if you like. So there's some advantages there, but certainly around compliance, legislation, insurance, safety. There's so many things that you can certainly still be a small business, but you can get caught up in some really serious consequences if you're not aware of some of the risks involved. So I think there's so many things in that area. The product is changing all the time. You build relationships with OEMs and suppliers, get exposure to more people in the industry.
And you build friendships that last a lifetime as well. Just seeing people and having a drink afterwards or during the show, and you're sort of excited, like, oh, that's so-and-so from wherever, or maybe something embarrassing happens and you sort of have that memory to share and whatnot. So I think it's the friendships that come out of it as well. And I think it was like Braden Murin came on the podcast like a few years ago. It's been a long time, but I remember he said something that like really resonated. It was like, you really only get out what you put in when you go to those sort of shows. If you go there with a negative mindset and you're like, oh, this is boring, it's all about like just chit chat and sales. It's like you got to go there and actually try and want to build relationships and maybe have that phone call or coffee after the show and whatnot. So if you go in with a negative mindset, you're probably going to think it's not worth it. But if you go in there wanting something out of it and giving back as well, it's probably going to be very beneficial.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. And the shows have changed a lot over the years. They used to be for a longer period and more. There used to be a working trade show day where everyone could touch and feel and use the machinery. That's not available anymore. So really, if you're interested in equipment, you go there, have a look at it, see multiple suppliers in the one place, and then have follow-up demonstrations after that if needs be. From a supplier point of view, it's a great way to get access to so many senior business owners, senior managers who generally aren't then distracted by their phones or being in meetings, etc. You've got good access to the key members of the industry.
Yeah, very good. So I ask this question with every guest. So I always ask, how do you define success?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I to me, there's probably several ways. Personally, it's, if you can be successful with friends and family and have good people around you and if, achieve your goals, whatever they may be, I think they're important. Professionally, if you're happy at the end of the day and you go home and you feel like you've achieved something at the end of the day or at the end of the week, and then if you can build something, if that's what you want to do, if you want to progress through organisations, if you want to start a new branch, start your own business, if you're that way inclined. For me, a lot of enjoyment has come from seeing people develop, and being around this long, you see people who they then would have children, and then we've been able to employ their children in the business as well. So there's fathers and sons that have come through the business. So that's been a great thrill. So
yeah, definitely. So I heard a rumour that you are planning your retirement.
That's true. That is true.
So we're going to blast it out to everyone. So now a lot of people are going to know. So maybe you want to talk through when and maybe the why and what does the transition look like?
Yeah, so I've given a long period of notice. So I won't finish up with Kennards till the end of June, but I will go on a couple of months long service leave prior to that. So really the intent is to help the business with my succession and my replacement coming in to the role. So there'll be some change for that person, clearly, whoever that may be, and so that'll give us an opportunity to have a really, really good handover, which will be great for our internal people, but also our customers. How did I get to the decision? Not lightly, that's for sure. It's a big step. But I think now I've been back in Sydney for 5 years, and it's time to keep moving again. I've done a lot in my working life, so and travel's been a big part of what we want to do. So my wife and I will go off and travel overseas, spend quite a few months next year overseas, and like active travel. So want to do that while I'm still young enough to be able to do some of that sort of travel, and then settle back in Perth with friends and family.
Yeah, because your kids are still back in Perth?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I've got a son who's in Western Australia,
Yeah.
So.
Wow. It's always a tough decision because it's like, well, what do I do? Like, what happens after? And like, you don't know until you know, but then a lot of people work late into their 70s and 80s. And,
correct.
And you're also like, well, don't you want to enjoy life as well while you can? And so you taking the opportunity to travel and whatnot is probably a great thing. So
yeah, so we will spend probably 7 or 8 months overseas, mostly in Europe next year, and then go back into Perth in early 26 and live there for some time. After that, I don't know what I'll do. I'll be very surprised if I'm not doing something in a board or consultancy or helping people out in a part-time capacity. I'm very fortunate I won't work full-time again as such, but the industry's been great to me, and if I can give back in some way or help people with what they're doing, and that'll be something I'd do, and then probably something in a charity sort of type give back space as well, but to keep me a little bit busy. But we'll see. After a long holiday, I may not want to do any of that, so we'll see.
Yeah, that's amazing. So listening, gonna be like, wait a second, there's a job opening. There's a job opening. So I think, you mentioned that so you're finishing up in June, and so I'm assuming Kennards Hire is going to start the recruitment process over the next month or two.
Yeah, very quickly. It'll be well underway quickly. I'm not sure when this podcast will be out, but the recruitment will start with the view to try and have someone in place before Christmas, and then have a good long handover.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure Kennards Hire is very appreciative of all the stuff that you've done for that business and the industry as well. Like, you've basically given your entire life, working life almost to the industry. So yeah, thank you for the efforts that you've put in as well.
No, thank you, and thanks for your involvement and your promoting of the industry with this work you do with this podcast. It's been phenomenal, and it's got a very strong following, so well done.
Thank you. All right, thanks for coming to the podcast, Tony.
Thank you.